On January 10th, newly inaugurated Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed 7 executive orders. One of these banned teaching critical race theory in Arkansas schools, and that continued a trend that we've consistently seen over the last 2 years. In one of their analyses, Education Week documented that 42 states have introduced bills or taken other steps, such as an executive order, that would restrict teaching critical race theory or limit how teachers can discuss racism and sexism in the classroom. Arkansas's ban extols the virtues of education over indoctrination and insists that educators should teach students how to think, not what to think. And using those nice words, it then states that, quote, critical race theory, CRT, is antithetical to the traditional American values of neutrality, equality, and fairness. It emphasizes skin color as a person's primary characteristic, thereby resurrecting segregationist values which America has fought so hard to reject. For anyone who has followed the ongoing and sometimes surreal journey, you probably don't need an explanation of why this pushback continues whenever we attempt a fuller reckoning with our racist past and present. But it is probably good to remember at least some of the reasons why CRT has been targeted in this way. As Education Week points out, CRT simply, quote, refers to a decades-old academic theory that holds that racism is systemic, perpetuated by structural forces rather than individual acts of bias. But over the past 2 years, the phrase has been warped from its original meaning, used by opponents to refer to anything that makes race or gender salient in conversations about history, current events, or literature. To put this another way, these bans are an overt attempt to discredit and erase a set of ideas and practices that would help us understand how racism actually works in the world. And it replaces CRT's analysis of how racism operates within cultures and structures with an emphasis, a very convenient emphasis, on individual bias. That allows discussions about racism to focus on those individuals and shields the true engines that drive white supremacy from view or from change. This is why last year the ACLU rightly observed that, quote, at their core, anti-CRT laws are thinly veiled attempts to silence discussions of race and gender among students and educators. The language is often vague and it creates confusion and puts teachers in stressful situations, uncertain about what they are and are not allowed to say and teach. For example, in 2021, a group of Tennessee parents appealed to the state's anti-CRT law to remove books from the curricula that teach about the civil rights movement. The books labeled as offensive included a children's book about the March on Washington, 2 books about Ruby Bridges and school desegregation written for children, and a picture book about the integration of Southern California schools in the 1940s. And the basis for their appeal was that, quote, the Tennessee law makes lesson plans illegal if students feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish. One parent, who was leading the charge, explained that the Williamson County curriculum makes students feel bad about their race, meaning the law should invalidate it. The practical result is that teachers are pressured to self-censor in order to avoid any controversy, and children are robbed of the opportunity to learn about how humans have hurt one another, how they have stood up for what is right, and how they have healed those wounds and created or tried to create communities where we learn to live with justice, equity, and compassion. This all feels particularly relevant on the annual observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The King Center at Stanford University has identified 6 steps of nonviolent social change based on Dr. King's nonviolent campaigns and his teachings that always emphasized love in action. These bans directly undermine and attempt to disempower the approach that King championed and that were a vital part of the civil rights movement and countless movements since then. And we can observe this especially in the first 2 steps of King's 6 steps of nonviolent social change. Those are information gathering and education. In information gathering, Stanford describes it this way: to understand and articulate an issue, problem, or injustice facing a person, community, or institution, you must do research. You must investigate and gather all vital information from all sides of the argument or issue so as to increase your understanding of the problem. You must become an expert on your opponent's position. And education. It is essential to inform others, including your opposition, about your issue. This minimizes misunderstandings and gains you support and sympathy. To counter these troubling trends, opposing free access to information and education requires more than just our outrage. Another of King's 6 steps is direct action, taken when the opponent is unwilling to enter into or remain in discussion or negotiation. We intentionally try to bring a creative tension into the conflict, supplying moral pressure on your opponent to work with you in resolving the injustice, in the words of the King Center. The bans on critical race theory strike me as just that, a collective unwillingness to enter into or remain in discussion on the continued issues of racial terrorism in the United States. And they represent another instance in a long history of deflection, of those in power seeking to silence the voices and the histories of Black liberation in the face of white supremacist violence. In whatever way you honor Martin Luther King Jr., I hope you can add a few commitments that last longer than just this one day. Especially for white folks, please, always we say this, study, listen, learn, read history books, listen to podcasts, study critical race theory for yourself. Do the work to gather information and educate yourself so that you can more intentionally and strategically support and participate in anti-racist efforts, including dismantling your own internalized dominance or internalized oppression. And link this to your conversations and to your community actions. Locally here where we live, we continue to be engaged in actions to support our educators dealing with exactly these issues of demonizing and banning critical race theory in our schools, and more broadly addressing racism at all. But alongside these efforts, since history and critical thinking are being banned from our classrooms, wouldn't it be great to see more and more of these classes being offered in churches and libraries and after-school clubs, bookstores, and cafes? And wouldn't it be great if you helped to make that happen? And while doing so, let's keep in mind the wisdom that a very young Martin Luther King Jr. also shared, that, quote, "To save humans from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate." That is exactly the kind of education we need for our time. Joining compassion together with wisdom and refusing to be distracted or discouraged by the morass of propaganda that would keep us from living more fully into the beloved community that Martin Luther King so passionately described and so determinedly pursued. Thank you.